You understood that people don't attack weakness. They attack what they can't understand. So you played the fool in rooms full of loud pretenders. You let them underestimate you because invisibility was your strategy. They spoke in circles, chasing validation, while you studied silence. You realized that being underestimated grants freedom. Nobody blocks what they don't notice. Nobody competes with what they think is harmless. You let them laugh, let them talk, and let them reveal themselves. Then, when the moment came, your results did the speaking. That's when they froze. The person they dismissed turned out to be the one rewriting their reality. You carried your potential like a secret weapon. You never needed to announce it. The world loves noise but underestimates precision. You chose the latter. While they wasted time trying to look intelligent, you invested in becoming it. You worked when no one was watching, learned when others mocked, and moved in ways they couldn't track. They thought simplicity meant lack. They mistook quiet for ignorance. But genius doesn't roar, it observes. You allowed them to project their arrogance until it collapsed under its own weight. When truth finally revealed itself, they realized you had been calculating while they were performing. You didn't outshine them. You outlasted them. And that distinction cut deeper than any confrontation ever could. You wore normalcy like armor. You knew how dangerous recognition can be in a world built on competition. They look for genius and eccentricity, never realizing real intelligence hides behind ordinary behavior. You blended into the crowd because you understood the psychology of survival. You let people feel comfortable in your presence, even superior. Their guard stayed down. Their motives slipped out. You collected information the way others collect approval. That's the paradox of subtle power. It never has to shout. It lingers in the background until the world can no longer ignore it. When they finally looked back, your footsteps had already become foundations. They wondered how you did it. The answer was simple. You didn't seek attention, you studied it. They mocked your stillness because they feared their own. You weren't distracted by trends or urgency. You were building with intent. You trained your mind to think in decades while they thought in days. That's why you move differently now. You stopped needing immediate applause because you understood that true legacy is invisible until it's irreversible. People don't see the process, they only react to the product. You built depth in a shallow world, and that depth made you untouchable. They tried to compete. But how do you compete with someone who's not playing the same game? You never tried to win their approval. You focused on mastering yourself. That's the ultimate act of rebellion in a culture obsessed with image. You watched how they craved recognition, mistaking attention for achievement. They chased eyes, not excellence. You did the opposite. You practiced in private while they performed in public. When the results emerged, it felt unfair to them. They couldn't comprehend how someone so unassuming became the standard. That's what frightens mediocrity. It cannot detect preparation until it's too late. You didn't rush your rise, you orchestrated it. You studied patterns, learned behaviors, and refined your craft while pretending not to notice theirs. By the time they realized your capacity, their positions had become irrelevant. You turned patience into a strategy and humility into camouflage. That's how quiet people end up shaking entire systems. They never warned before arrival. They thought hiding meant fear, but you were conserving energy. You understood that constant visibility drains influence. You weren't hiding, you were observing. You were learning the architecture of human behavior, the predictable patterns of pride and insecurity. You noticed how people betray themselves with their need to be seen. That's why you stayed grounded. You didn't need to prove intelligence through argument, you proved it through outcome. That distinction unsettled them, because it stripped away their illusions of superiority. You didn't play smarter, you were smarter. But you never flaunted it. You used it surgically at the exact moment it mattered. That precision turned envy into silence. They realized too late that your plainness wasn't absence of brilliance, it was proof of control. You taught yourself to trust timing. Every genius who lasts understands that the world punishes visibility before it rewards it. You refused to rush exposure, because you knew premature recognition destroys momentum. You built in shadows where no applause could distract you. You focused on process instead of validation. They thought you were passive, but passivity was your disguise. You were the calm before disruption. And when your breakthrough arrived, it didn't announce itself. It shattered expectations. The irony is that the same people who overlooked you now quote you. That's the poetic justice of discipline. The world eventually bows to what it once ignored. You didn't chase your moment. You prepared for it so relentlessly that it had no choice but to arrive. They studied your success like it was sorcery. They asked how you did it, but they don't actually want the answer. It's too unglamorous. They want shortcuts, not sacrifice. You didn't have luck. You had obsession disguised as patience. You weren't praying for miracles. You were building systems. That's the difference between you and them. They want to look smart. You want to be effective. They thrive on being noticed. You thrive on being correct. They feared boredom. You mastered it. You used repetition as a forge. Every night they wasted seeking entertainment. You spent sharpening understanding. That's why you appear lucky now. What they call destiny was simply discipline hidden behind plain habits. Genius doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly until the noise drowns itself out. They finally saw the truth when it was too late. The plain face they dismissed had become the symbol of precision. Your calm dismantled their delusion of superiority. They realized too late that your strength came from preparation, not performance. They searched for weaknesses in you and found reflection instead. You became their mirror, the reminder of what focus looks like when uncorrupted by ego. They began to imitate you, but imitation without depth collapses quickly. You weren't crafted for applause, you were sculpted by endurance. That's what separates the authentic from the artificial. They discovered your genius only after it had become undeniable, and that revelation burned their pride. You were invisible until results made you unforgettable. You learned that power doesn't announce itself. It arrives uninvited, calm, and inevitable. The louder they moved, the more they revealed. You watched, waited, and refined your next step while they wasted energy performing progress. Silent moves, loud results. That became your doctrine. You understood that sound draws attention, and attention invites interference. So you built in stillness, away from their noise. You made yourself invisible until it was too late for them to react. While they bragged about beginnings, you prepared for endings. While they demanded recognition, you demanded precision. And when you finally acted, the world mistook it for magic. But there was nothing mystical about it. You had simply mastered the discipline of patience, the art of restraint, the science of momentum. They underestimated what they couldn't hear. In a world addicted to visibility, silence feels threatening. You weren't showing your cards, and that terrified them. They searched for clues, for weakness, for hesitation. They found none. You gave them nothing to work with. You became unreadable, and unrateable is unbreakable. They called you distant, mysterious, even cold, but that was just their discomfort speaking. They couldn't manipulate what they couldn't predict. You learned that power is a game of misdirection. Never let them know what matters to you. You stopped explaining, stopped posting, stopped proving. Your energy became private currency. Every decision you made was deliberate. Every silence was loaded. You built momentum quietly, knowing the reveal would speak louder than any explanation ever could. Your silence wasn't absence, it was design. You realized that progress grows best when it's undisturbed. Too many voices dilute clarity. Too many eyes distort purpose. You didn't need a crowd. You needed alignment. So you worked in solitude until your vision became reality. They didn't notice the long nights, the inner battles, the sacrifices. They only noticed when everything you worked for materialized. To them, it looked sudden. To you, it was inevitable. You let them believe it was overnight because explanations weaken impact. The loudest results are born in the quietest hours. While they spoke about change, you embodied it. You made evolution look effortless because the effort was invisible. They confused silence for stillness, but silence moves faster than noise ever could. You stopped reacting to distractions because you learned that response is a form of surrender. Every time you argue, you hand over energy. You refused. You let them talk, let them assume, let them underestimate. You kept building. You learned to use misunderstanding as camouflage. When people think you're harmless, you're free to move without resistance. That's the power of silence. It hides growth until growth becomes undeniable. They tried to study you but could never keep up, because you weren't moving publicly anymore. You were moving internally, leveling up where eyes couldn't follow. By the time they noticed, your silence had already built something they couldn't destroy. You discovered that most people fail not from lack of talent, but from the need to be seen too soon. You refused to feed that hunger. You delayed gratification, even recognition, because you understood that early validation kills longevity. You didn't need applause mid-performance. You wanted completion. While they broadcast every minor victory for clout, you accumulated mastery. You weren't addicted to acknowledgement. You were addicted to improvement. That separation made you untouchable. They relied on noise to appear relevant. You relied on results to stay inevitable. Every quiet move you made compounded silently. You built an empire brick by brick, and when the noise cleared, you were the only one still standing. You learned that silence exposes others. When you stop announcing your progress, you see who panics in your absence. They relied on your transparency to gauge their worth. When you went quiet, they lost their measurement. That's why they gossip. They're desperate to fill the void your silence created. They can't stand not knowing where you stand. You learn to let their curiosity work for you. Silence becomes psychological warfare when mastered. It forces people to create narratives, and in that confusion, they reveal their fears. You no longer had to confront enemies. They destroyed themselves guessing your next move. You understood that every word you don't say gains value, and every silence you keep gains power. They called your detachment arrogance, but it was strategy. You realized the difference between control and chaos lies in emotion. The loud are reactive, the silent are deliberate. You weren't disengaged, you were disciplined. You trained yourself to act without announcing, to move without momentum being noticed. You built credibility not through talk but through consistency. You didn't respond to disrespect, because respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something your results demanded for you. They couldn't understand how someone could stay calm in storms, but calmness was your rebellion. You stopped chasing peace and became it. And in a world that thrives on attention, your refusal to perform became your crown. They thought silence meant surrender until they saw what followed. You didn't warn before you transformed. You simply arrived, elevated, untouchable. They called it luck. But luck doesn't work this consistently. What they saw was strategy disguised as subtlety. You didn't ask for permission, you didn't seek approval. You executed. The loud ones mocked your pace, but your path was calculated. You let them rush toward irrelevance while you advanced toward inevitability. That's the beauty of silent moves. They compound invisibly, and by the time results appear, it's too late for competitors to catch up. The loud may look ahead temporarily, but the quiet own the finish line. Silence trains the mind to hear what others miss. You learn to listen between words, to read intention before action, to predict behavior through patterns. That gave you an advantage that no title or platform could replicate. You became so observant that reacting felt unnecessary. When you can see the entire board, you stop wasting time proving you're the best piece. That awareness is what separates leaders from followers. They operate from impulse. You operate from foresight. Your quietness wasn't detachment. It was observation sharpening into foresight. That's why your timing feels supernatural. It's not instinct. It's attention refined into intuition. The day your results arrived, the silence shattered like glass. They called it sudden, but you know better. You built the foundation when no one was looking. You shaped discipline into a weapon, and when the moment came, you didn't need words to explain. You had proof. Your results were your revenge, your validation, your closure. The same people who dismissed your quiet now echo your methods. You prove that in a world addicted to noise, silence is the only remaining form of dominance. Silent moves, loud results. That is not just a quote. It's a way of life. It's how you outgrow chaos without confrontation, how you rise without permission, and how you win without ever having to announce that you were playing.